This video was brought to you in part by Gamersops. They have a few new flavors out. Obviously, they have the white grapefruit that you might have heard me mention on my esports channel. I think it's actually quite delicious. Got a very refreshing flavor. It has a bit of sweetness, has a little bit of like a sourness. It's a really interesting approach. It has a really accurate taste, I think, to grapefruit. There's the anime girl thigh, which is actually some kind of like orange dreamsicle. It's all right, not really my flavor. I'm not as big a fan of it being like that, but if you like dreamsicle, if you know what that is, maybe you'll enjoy it. We've got some other ones, but I haven't tasted them yet, so I won't review them. Classic ones I like: Guacamole Game Fart 9000, Strawberry and Lime, Clyde's Black Cherry, Dragon Fruit Punch, Blue Raz, Mango Meta. There's a whole bunch out there. Use the code Thorin, THORIN, for 10% off at gamersups.gg. Now, when I do these movie recommendations, I notice people always, like in my AMAs, there's always questions like this. They all want recommendations of books, music, obviously movies, games. They want recommendations. I get it, because whenever I actually was reading interviews of people who are like great musicians and movie directors, I always wanted their recommendations too. What do they like? What inspires them? What's interesting? Maybe they know some stuff I don't know. So when I've done this though, you'll notice that when I try to do these lists, I try to do them quite thoughtfully. I don't just throw out 10 random names. I might in an AMA. On these ones, I try to take my time. I try to think through, what am I recommending here? Generally, I try to stay away from enormous movies that everyone has seen, that are just embedded in pop culture, huge box office hits. So this list, crucially, that's why I've themed it this way, it's 10 movies to take you to another world. Now, I get to interpret what another world is. So sometimes it might still be a period in history. Spoiler, I think a lot of history is nonsense. Sometimes it might be another world in a sci-fi sense. I think a lot of sci-fi is nonsense. Also, and then, a lot of science is nonsense. So to me, the key thing here is this is not 10 great movies. This is not 10 best movies, Thorin's 10 favourite movies. This is 10 movies where the whole premise is, in some context, which I'll explain, you're not going to have just a normal viewing experience when you watch these movies. And quite frankly, I think they're all going to be pretty memorable. I'm going to start with my first one, and it is going to be 1981's Excalibur by John Bowman, the director who did Deliverance and Point Blank, if you know those movies. Now, what's great about this movie is it's one of those ones that's been so panned, and people haven't watched it again, but they think it's just crap and it was a failure. And what were they thinking? Oh, it's one of those 80s movies that are on cocaine when they came up with this idea. No, it's a really, really interesting approach to the King Arthur legend / mythos, which is obviously foundational to Albion, to England, to the British Isles, quite frankly. And what's interesting about this one is, yes, because it's done in the early 80s, there's some ropey effects. Yeah, some of the actors aren't great actors, and it's a little bit wooden or stilted how they say their lines. But crucially, this is a movie you watch for the atmosphere. Like the atmosphere that's created when, for example, certain magical things happen, certain battles, like the force of certain characters, I think is actually really, really powerful. I think actually there's something behind that. There's something really strikes at you, actually, if you can engage with the movie in that sense. Like, basically, even though this is a character I think actually a lot of people would use to deride, I think the way they show the character of Merlin and even Morgana Le Fay, I think this is really interesting. I think that those actors do a great job. I think they're intentionally over the top. I think, again, when you don't have money and you don't have effects, quite frankly, I think modern effects are crap, by the way, of computer graphics. I think they take you completely out of the movie. What they do here is, though, it's theatre of the mind. It's imagination. They really, if you can use your suspension of disbelief, it's enough to let you believe these things are happening. It's also a movie, like a number that are going to be on this list, where another reason, this takes you in a fictional world, but another reason it's so ambitious is it's not trying to just be a movie even. Like, this goes way beyond the story you think you know about King Arthur. If you see any other movies with King Arthur or King Arthur Knights of the Round Table, you've never seen a movie like this. Like, it's so long in that sense. It tries to, you'll think halfway through, like, oh, the movie's about to end. It isn't. It's still got a whole lot to go, and there's a whole lot more, and quite frankly, the scope's going to rise up even more so. I think also it does have kind of, in a sense, parallels the story of King Arthur, if you know beyond the classic part of the story everyone knows, because I think the movie in itself is almost a kind of spiritual quest. It's trying to pace at something. It's trying to say something. It's trying to cover this large scope to almost validate the mythos and why it's so important to the English people, I would say, or the Britons, or whatever you want to call them. Then we're going to have 1994's Faust by Jan Svankmajer, a Czech film director. Now, crucially, this movie has real life live action elements, but it also has stop animation as a way to do the graphics. And I actually think when that's done well, it is really effective. It's actually a lot more compelling than, I would say, computer CGI graphics and massive ones where you just know that's a massive spaceship. Like, all right, mate, that was just done in a computer. You can't really engage with that often so many times because of the way it clashes against the background and your brain just knows it can't be real. The way this is done, you actually forget the technique. You just think, this is incredible. Like, this really is out there, especially, by the way, for anything supernatural. I think stop animation is incredible. So the crucial thing about this movie, you'll notice I'm really good at not spoiling movies too, is the kind of mechanics of how they are able to introduce the Faust story, but also almost like a 90s real life component, presumably in the Czech Republic, is so cleverly done. And as a result, it is so bizarre as a movie and yet so compelling. Like, you'll be watching it, you'll be thinking, I'm loving this, the actual classic Faust story. I wouldn't even thought it was that great. It's really interesting. Some of the aspects, wow, I never really thought it was like this. But then also you'll think, what's going on with this real life element and what are we doing between the scenes and what's going on in this movie? But that's the thing, you're not supposed to watch it and think, what's the plot and what's to get. It's a way to tell you the story. It's an excuse to get you into the story in a way you wouldn't go and watch the theatre play of this. In fact, this is sort of half theatre play, half movie almost, even though it is very much a movie. I would also say the voice acting in the English dub is really good, especially, let's just say, some of the certain stop animation characters in the movie. It's so fabulously done. And the fact that they use some of the oldie world way of talking, you'll see, really suits the movie and makes it extremely fun to watch when you get into it. Also, I'll just throw this out there. This is one of those movies that, let's just say, it's very easy to find online. Like, you'll be shocked at how easy it is to find an English language dub, out there on the old intertubes, right? Third one is going to be 1991's Naked Lunch. Now, you might know I already did a video on this because for me, it's one of the best examples of what I want adaptation to be. I don't want it to be a one-to-one from a book or a comic because the medium is different. So actually, usually it's inappropriate to do that and yields a not as great movie like the Dune version by Villeneuve. It's beautiful. It's got some very stunning scenes in it, but it doesn't capture almost any of the essence of the book for me. It's actually where it tries to be sort of faithful is where it falls down. Like, I actually like it when people take chances, where they're ambitious, where they change elements. That's why I would have loved Jodorowsky's Dune. I mean, I'm a massive fan of his work in the comics. So obviously this one was by David Cronenberg of The Fly, Videodrome, a lot of modern movies. I could actually have picked Videodrome for this one because I've already done something about Naked Lunch, but I think this one, to suit it, I think this one's the best example of going to a totally different world. Like one where, I mean, you're in a person's imagination almost, or their conception of what the fictional world is like. And what's crazy about this movie, what I love about it is, it's not really an adaptation of Naked Lunch, which itself isn't really a novel. It's a bunch of scribbles and stories and short things and something that a guy wrote when he was on heroin and was having some very bizarre times in his life. So what they do instead in this movie is it's more like a biography / biopic that melts together his fiction into elements of his life. And I think I would describe it like this. It attempts a thematic analysis and synthesis of the themes of the author's work and life, a la, I'd actually say, what Danny Boyle did with the Steve Jobs movie. I think the ending to that is brilliant, but it definitely is not what happened to Steve Jobs or even vaguely based on reality. So I think this one it's a really out there movie. You're going to think it's starting, it's just normal people. It's going to already go to some bonkers places. And David Cronenberg was the perfect person because of how good he is at using those weird puppets and those body horror elements and the eerie visuals. They suit this so well. There's the whole angle of they're in Marrakesh, but wait, is it Interzone? What is Interzone? Which is obviously these are massive themes within William Burroughs' work. So to me, I thought this was really, really well done. It has some nightmarish scenes that will stay with you forever. This might be a movie you watch once and never again, but it's a movie that if you can let yourself go, you will really go somewhere different. And also has a very underrated cast of character actors. Not a lot of like great actors from history, but like we're talking the ones that when you give them those side characters, they nail it and they're always so memorable. Number 4 is going to be 1981's Time Bandits. Now, this is a Terry Gilliam film of Monty Python, 12 Monkeys, Brazil. Now, in terms of like cult classics, a lot of people are going to know Time Bandits. I absolutely could have just gone with something else here. Like obviously the more classic one for the Going to Another World would be Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which is a really out there ambitious movie. But actually I chose Time Bandits because it's one of those ones where I am so shocked how few people have seen this movie. Like, this is one of the ones that, film like critics will talk about, but you talk to normal everyday people, they've never seen it because it's from the 80s. In the modern day where they have all the flicks and the primers, they're never going back and watching these movies. They're just watching new crap that comes out, more cape shit. So as a result, this is a movie I try to get people to watch who say they're into film, who want to watch like out there movies, and want to watch really ambitious movies. This is a really ambitious movie. Like, this is time travel, as the name suggests, on a level you are not prepared for. You can't even conceive of the scope of where it's going to go. It's actually a comedy, but it's so captivating too, and the story behind it could even exist without the comedy component. It has almost like a children's story component to it, of how like definitely think elements of the story aren't nice to the titular character, well, not titular, the main character, the protagonist, let's say. It's got a great cast of talents. You're going to be shocked at some of the actors that are in this movie, and some of them will just nail it. Amazing big box office actors, amazing character actors. It's another one, you'll see it a little bit like Cloud Atlas later, where the universality of some of the characters is quite interesting. This actually has a very unique take on the sort of spiritual realm. The conception of time, or what it is, and how you could potentially travel through it is really cleverly done, I thought. And yeah, I mean, I'm just always shocked how few people have seen this. This is a movie where it might be one of your favourite movies, might be one of your favourite sci-fi movies, and it will certainly stay with you if you can get through the whole thing. Number 5 is going to be 2018's Mandy by Panos Cosmatos, who is also the director. I could also have done Beyond the Black Rainbow, but I think this is the more palatable one. This is a film I would describe as intoxicating. It is one where it really does merge all elements of the media together. Like the intensity of the acting performances, the unique use of like color palettes for different scenes and different themes, an incredible soundtrack that overwhelms. This is almost like Interstellar level of how memorable it'll be. You probably go and get the soundtrack after this. It's so good. The key thing about this movie is, yes, it's based in reality, but is it? Aren't some of the elements absolutely fantastical, taking on almost like spiritual components with a very, very, very dark bent to it? I would say the thing about this movie is it's intoxicating, but then it's like going into a bad trip. The emotional intensity becomes crazy in this movie, and it doesn't just go far, it probably goes too far. It goes very, very far. Like, the faint-hearted shouldn't watch this movie, and if you watch it, it might be a watch once ever in your life movie, but it's going to be so powerful and experience. And by the way, yeah, Nicolas Cage is the lead actor. This is perfect casting. Nicolas Cage can be amazing when he chews up the scene. Nicolas Cage can be a very sincere and earnest actor. I think they get all of it out of him. And all I'll say is this is where you know this movie is really full on. Is you watch this movie and you tell me if 3/4 of the way to the whole movie through, you don't eventually have just a seething hatred, just almost like a pornographic lust for violence, to lash out. I'll tell you, this movie will stay with you. It's a really, really far out one. I'll definitely be watching this director's career as it progresses. At number 6, I'm already going to gamble by going The Holy Mountain from 1973, one of those classic movies that people would take acid and then go and watch at the cinema. Now, this is one by Alejandro Jodorowsky, one of my favourite artists, the guy who did El Topo, not that many other great movies, Santa Sangra. More famously, I prefer him for the comics. I think the Meta Barons, Techno Priests, The Ink Art are some of the greatest work of all time. Some of them are going to be adapted into movies. They haven't really been yet, but spoiler, the last 30 to 50 years of Hollywood sci-fi movies were just stealing compulsively from these comics in an absolutely shameless way. So the joke is, you've seen loads of these things, they were just in other people's movies. And this is the guy who, obviously, the Jodorowsky's Dune documentary, which must be seen, was all about. Really fantastic mind. Still going, by the way, in his 90s now. What an absolute genius artist he is. This is a movie which is not going to be a plot that you're going to watch with great graphics and actors you reckon. None of those things. This is an experience. And it is not going to be one that's always so totally, it's definitely stimulating, but you're not going to always understand what's going on. There's a lot of dream logic type thinking in this movie. In fact, I'd really say this movie is really out there with its metaphors and its allegories, but it is trying to tell you certain truths, or it's trying to poke at certain things. It's got underlying themes which are certainly more conscious than maybe they initially appear, but it's a 70s movie, so parts of it can be really wacky. I would say this is almost like 3 movies in one. The first part is just a must watch. It's really out there retelling / allegory of a certain religious component. The second one is really art house. even I sometimes go, unless you know that, but if you don't know that much about astrology and stuff, like this is one that the first time you watch it's going to be harder in the middle. The third part is sort of meta-contextual, it's postmodern. I mean, this is just a movie that's just so ambitious. It just really dares go there. And it doesn't always make the jump over the chasm, but it's willing to try again. And what are you watching movies for? If you just want to watch two people fall in love or two people go on one little quest, there's a million crap movies out there on your old flickses, right? I would say this is a movie that attempts to convey some kind of a spiritual truth, or it has like a real earnestness behind the work, even if some elements are silly and very over the top, like the idea of what the mountain represents within it, the notions of what immortality might be, what religion might do and function as in society and how it might be used. Just don't expect it to be a plot. It's not a Hollywood movie in any context. Now, here is a Hollywood movie, but it's another one of those ones where there's so many sci-fi movies just sort of fell through the cracks. Like, this is done by Danny Boyle, guys, in 2007, Sunshine. This is the guy who directed Trainspotting, Slumdog Millionaire, Steve Jobs, like, loads of movies you've seen. But so this is the one that a lot of people just forgot or never really saw. And I think the crazy thing about it is, it has a cast, you'll recognize so many of them, but it's mainly before they got huge as actors. Like, it's later on in their careers they became the big actors and starred in the big things. So the fact that they're all in this movie at once, actually it's aged pretty well for a cast. I would say this is a really overlooked movie, especially compared to other movies in the genre, like, let's say, Event Horizon or Interstellar, these sorts of films. You almost never hear this one cited. Now, it's not like a great movie. I would say this is more of a one-time watch. But the first time you watch it, go into it without knowing anything, and you are not going to know where it's going. You're not going to know what's coming, and things about it will be shocking and quite interestingly done. It's not the classic sort of like, it's a quest with some bumps along the way. It's an interesting take on this approach. Also, for me, sci-fi is all fiction, isn't it? Or sometimes the craziest sci-fi is actually the truth, if you know what I mean. So I would say this is really imaginative use of a lot of modern scientific concepts. And I think it has quite a nice twist along the way that you won't see coming from the first parts of the movie. Number 8 is going to be 2012's Cloud Atlas by the Wachowskis, who made The Matrix, Speed Racer, Bound. Maybe skip the middle one, but watch the other two, obviously. This is a movie that is impossibly ambitious. One of the most ambitious movies ever attempted. Reminiscent, if you know the video game reference, of what Daikatana was trying to do. And there's a reason Daikatana did not make it and become a AAA game and succeed, because it was almost too much you're trying to accomplish. It would be the greatest movie of all time if you could have nailed all this. Like, it would be a 10 out of 10. So the interesting thing about it is, it has elements that remind me a bit of some of the Christopher Nolan movies that lose people, where you're going to actually be at times maybe confused about the recurring use of the cast throughout some of the different stories that it tells. There's a bunch of stories all in one with some kind of a theme that emerges as the movie goes on. It's got a lot of good actors, tons of them, and they all recur in each of the things, but you might not understand, why is this one that type of a character and then this one, and are they supposed to be the same character at a different time, or is this allegorical? Oh no, wait, that was a story that one person was telling and then this person was dreaming of one, and then it's really out there. It's really out there. And some of the makeup is wild, but I just actually appreciate that they went for it. And some of it does land, and some of it doesn't, is interesting. And some of it's like, I mean, like I say, it's so many stories in one. How could you hate it is my problem. To me, because it's so ambitious and it reaches so far and tries to tell such a epic, potentially majestic story, certain aspects about sort of like the human spirit and things like that, I think you cannot help but be captivated by this movie, compelled by this movie. It will be a memorable experience, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with any of the aspects or not, whether some of it turns you off, some of it's too out there, some of it you don't really know what's going on. It's really an experience. I think this is a must-watch movie for any true cinephile out there. Number 9, it's going to be a recur. I've got another David Cronenberg on here. I could have done a bunch of David Cronenberg ones. He's one of the best directors for this type of movie. 1999's Existenz. Now, what's funny is, obviously one of my favourite players in Counter-Strike, Existenz, with a 6 there. Sort of a similar name, right? Even with a Z on the end. Now, what's funny is this is a movie that's been mega panned. And even people who like movies are just like, oh, it was crap or whatever. But it's one of those movies where I have a different take on movies than a lot of people. So many times when people tell me movies don't make sense or like the plot holes, they're the movies that make the most sense. I think they're just midwits. They're the movies that actually fit together very well. They're the ones where when I think about it, actually that's really well done, the way it loops into itself and fits here and what it implies about what I saw earlier and actually about me watching the movie. I actually thought this was an example of a movie that famously is in the same peerage as Matrix, Dark City. This is one that I think it's one of the best video game / simulation examples I've ever seen put on film. It's got a really strong cast. Actually, almost everyone does a really good job in their role, even though, again, some of them aren't at that peak of their fame. I think it, again, like all Cronenberg movies of this era, uses very good body horror components. And quite frankly, I think now it's actually aged better because, in my opinion, now, when people talk about simulation things on an everyday basis, some of the questions that you will ask yourself about this one, though, from a body horror angle of like what it means to have a smartphone and be having near your body so much, and people putting all these different tech all over their bodies and encroaching it all into their lives. I think it asks a lot of questions there. What it would be like to be inside the world or outside of a world, and would people think that there were demonic elements to these worlds and try to stop the creators, or would they embrace it? I think this is a movie that was so prescient and ahead of its time. Cronenberg really is one of those. Look, he's a dark genius, but he's got such an amazing sort of third eye and imagination for cinema and conceptions. The 10th and final movie is going to be another simulation type movie. It's going to be The 13th Floor from 1999, directed by Joseph Rusnak, not someone I'm particularly familiar with. This is probably the most unique conception of simulation theory I've ever witnessed, especially this idea, this mechanic within it of like when you go into the simulation was running without you and you sort of assume one of the characters. So when you leave the simulation, that character continues to run without you though. And so what would people inside the simulation think? And would they think it was this movie is one that, look, you don't answer the questions as much as it asks questions. And I think it does an amazing job. It's one of the best examples of what sci-fi can be, but it's so unknown. It's so underrated. Like people talk, it was just a whatever. I think this is one where it has enormous implications, especially, by the way, if you're someone who in your world conception has anything like demonic possession or some being John Malkovich shit of entering someone else's mind or body or spirit, or even think those are conceivable ideas. The cast is really interesting. Like, first of all, one of the main people is Craig Bierko, who's just mad underrated. Like in loads of Cinderella Man, he's just in loads of movies where he does a really, really good job. Vincent D'Onofrio isn't this guy just good in almost everything he's done for like 20 or 40 years at this point in time? Armin Muller-Stahl, yeah, he plays the same sort of character in every movie. He's just the best at that role, though, isn't he? He's just absolutely phenomenal at those types of roles. So I think this is another one where it's fun. This is more of a traditional movie with sci-fi components. It's more of traditional sci-fi, but it dares to ask bigger questions. It's very ambitious in its own way. Also, within one of the simulations, what a great period to pick to go to, right? The 30s. You'll see it's a classic era with the art that you like to see and music and the personalities of the characters and what they'd be like. It's also aping sort of like cinema movies from the 30s or 40s or set then, or what your conception of that time period was like. So there's my 10. Now, I could have put a whole bunch of other movies in here, but the ones that I've already recommended, for example, in my 10 best movies you've never seen, like Dark City, The Fountain, Ashes of Time Redux, there's plenty out there I could have gone with. But I thought these were 10 good ones to go with now. And I'll certainly do a lot more themed movies on recommendations, music, movies. But I'm going to keep doing it my style with my own selection of what the theme is, so that it's not just movies that you've seen before. My side channel is very much made possible thanks to my Patreon community. Now, this video was kindly supported by rawdota, Bo Addo Mushroom, and Yerka86. Do you want to choose a topic I focus on next on this channel? Would you like to ask a question for my regular AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out which guests are coming on Thorin Query next for those long, interesting, but unique interviews? Do you want to take part in an exclusive, never to be released discussion with me privately? Well, heed this call to action and join Thorin's side today via the Patreon link in the description box below.